Welcome back to the Cyber Consulting Room podcast, and welcome back to our captivating two-part interview with the one and only Helen Patton, who is a cybersecurity executive advisor and former CSO of Cisco. In part one, we explored Helen's belief that superior business outcomes hinge on empowering people within an organization. We delved into her strategies for fostering a security culture and leveraging industry connections for tangible business success. Now, in part two, we'll dive deeper. Get ready to hear Helen's insights on influencing public policy for positive change in the cybersecurity landscape. We'll also explore her thoughts on building trust in an increasingly technological world. So buckle up and prepare to be further inspired by Helen Patton's dedication to a more secure and empowered digital future in the Cyber Consulting Room podcast. So in your view, what is the biggest challenge in ensuring technology is trustworthy for both personal and professional use? So making technology trustworthy, what do you find the biggest challenge is to make technology trustworthy?
So for me, trustworthy means it's going to behave the way I expect. It's going to be available when I need it. And those are really the two main things. What makes things unavailable is complexity. And what makes things not behave the way I expect is complexity. Sometimes there are barriers in place like trade secrets and things like that people don't want to share. So sometimes it's not that it's complex, it's just that people are intentionally not being transparent. As long as I understand that they're intentionally not being transparent, they're not just withholding information from me and I don't even know they're withholding, that's a sort of a different baby. But generally, I think the problem underneath trustworthiness is complexity. And so to the extent that we can put in place systems that manage for, I don't think you can get rid of complexity, but if we can manage for the complexity, it's going to help with our systems being trustworthy. The rise of generative AI is the new frontier of understanding whether something is trustworthy or not. And I don't think we fully wrapped our arms around that one yet either. But even if you went back just to basic things like cloud computing or encryption algorithms, like just at the subcomponent level, things can be super complex too. When you layer complexity on top of complexity on top of complexity, it's really hard to be trustworthy. So,
and then throw in a glossy user interface to make it simple.
Yeah, if the user interface makes it simple, then that's great. But if it hides things going on that I as a user didn't expect or didn't consent to, then that's a problem too, right? So this is the eternal balance of users want things to be easy and simple, but that doesn't mean that makes them trustworthy either. You know, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. What's the technology equivalent of making the pig less like a pig, I guess, is how to fix my metaphors.
Yeah, I don't know if the cryptography designers necessarily thought of it to be as something like that, but complexity on complexity on complexity, it's turtles all the way down. So there's anything to keep it as simple as possible without reducing visibility for people that need it is definitely important.
Yep. And I'm not expecting everybody to want the level of visibility that I do, right? But this is where we have the security industry. This is why I've got an auto mechanic that knows how to make my car run, and all I know is how to put the key in the ignition and press the accelerator and the brake pedal, right? The average user is not going to want to know the nuts and bolts, but I think we in the security community need to know the nuts and bolts, and we need systems that allow us to see the nuts and bolts. And right now it's getting hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good description of the current state. So beyond technical controls, what are some human factors or cultural aspects organizations can address to build trust in the technology that they're creating or their technology infrastructure?
How we go about creating a thing, a system, an application, a technology service that people are going to use, how we go about creating it and building it needs to be, that process needs to be as transparent as possible. And I get that we're going to bump into intellectual property protections and those kinds of things, but if you can shine light on how things are made, then I think it builds trust in the thing. And that's why I really support bug bounty programs and those kinds of things, because companies then purposely put their stuff out there to say, this is what it is, this is how it should work, go find the places where it doesn't. Because even within an individual company, sometimes it's really hard to get that level of transparency and understanding. So to the extent we can just make those things as translucent as possible, then that I think is going to help with the trust side of things. I think the other thing is, you can't think about things like ethics in technology after you've already created the latest killer app, right? It's got to be considered as part of the build process. So what are the values by which you run your company? What are the values by which you build a solution? Those things also need to be upfront and they need to be operationalized. And I think if you can do that, then you go a long way towards building that trust that everyone's looking for.
I've been doing some research into the tenets of trust in human factors of trust rather than specifically for technology. So I've been providing pre-vetting of cybersecurity consultants. The customers end up needing to have a certain amount of trust in the consultants that are on the platform. So
That's right.
There's a background check. They do a police check as well, look at the industry certifications and education qualifications and check to make sure that they exist, verify them. There's an interview with a previous customer or employer, and then they get given a rating score out of 5. So these consultants, it's similar to a talent marketplace.
Sure. That's great.
But so I've been doing some research through that process of interviewing people, and there's very trust and quality-based questions. And it's very interesting to see what people say during those interviews. I'm looking planning on preparing some paper for a talk in a few years after I've accumulated a number of these, just to say, look, this is what we found from people trying to get rated as a certain amount of pre-vetting for trustworthiness. You touched on AI briefly. Within the growing adoption of AI in organizations, there's new security considerations. Can you discuss some of the specific security challenges posed by AI technologies and how do organizations address them?
So there's 2 pieces of AI and security that I talk with my partners and customers about. One is, where is AI showing up in your business? For what purpose? And in doing that, how does it change the risk profile of the organization? And that's a technical question, but it's also an operational question as well. And then the second question is, how can you use AI to improve the security or augment or manage the security of your organization? So where does AI become a threat and where can it become a tool? And both of those are like really completely different conversations. When we're talking about AI at the moment, we're not just talking about machine learning, although machine learning is a piece of AI. I think the conversation right now is around generative AI and AI learning language models that are going to generate new ideas, new decisions, new outcomes that maybe humans wouldn't. And if you ask me this question 3 months from now, I'd give you a different answer because things are going to change that fast.
That fast.
There is a lot of material out there that talks about trustworthy AI and what it means to have a trustworthy AI system. And the way we seem to be going about it is that the few organizations that are creating large language models are creating tests for those models to test various trustworthy elements. So there's tests to see if it's secure. There's tests to see if it's transparent. There's tests to see if the language model is ethical. There's tests to see if the language model is biased. And all those things are great. But there are some problems with the tests. One of the problems with the tests themselves is that they're written by the same companies that are writing the language models. So they're inherently biased in favor of the outcomes of the purpose of the language model and the AI elements. So we don't have independent testing models at the moment. That can be a bit of a problem with the test itself. We've got testing elements that don't talk to one another. So sometimes the output of one test could become the input of another test, but the tests don't work together. So people who are trying to test the overall validity and transparency and so forth and trustworthiness of a language model have to learn all of these different kinds of tests and how to run them and how to feed data to them and all of those things. So that's a bit of a problem. The other thing that's going on in terms of sort of problems is a lot of the language models have used all the native data that's out there to train the models. So they've run out of data, but they need more data. So they're going to create synthetic data to feed the language models. And then the question is, what kind of bias and other things are in the synthetic data? And so the
Is it
language
going to be a
models,
bubble?
is it going to be a
Yeah.
bubble? Is it garbage in, garbage out, right? And or bias in, bias out. So
Mm.
I think there's some things like that at sort of the macro level we have to think about. At the more use case level, there are plenty of organizations I'm talking to that just aren't ready to create their own AI solutions yet. So they're buying AI from other vendors. So whether it's a Microsoft or a Google or an OpenAI or a whoever, and they don't really have a very good way of evaluating the security profile of the things that they're buying. So they're faithfully buying things and bringing them into their environment because they don't want to miss out. But they don't really yet know what that's doing to their risk profile. So that's a bit of a problem as
I
well.
read somewhere that
And
there's not much of a payoff. There's businesses are still waiting for the payoff with AI, and so there's a few investors that put a lot of money put into AI, but they're not necessarily seeing a return on investment yet.
yeah, not yet. It's starting to get there though, and we're starting to see use cases pop up. So we're certainly starting to see chatbots and sort of digital assistants, if you will, that are going to be able to be monetized and commercialized and all of those kinds of things. So we're seeing those kinds of things. In the medical space, we're seeing AI being used for diagnostics and clinician kind of work, that kind of thing. We're certainly seeing it in terms of helping people do analysis and research and those kinds of things that really speed up the way they've worked compared to historical speeds, those kinds of things. So I think we're starting to see it, but what we're not seeing is sort of the miraculous breakthrough things that everyone's being promised. So we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. But the return on investment on AI is going to be fast, I think.
That's a very good insight. When it finally clicks in, and it's not quite a solution searching for a problem, but there's different use cases and definitely certain, as you're saying, diagnostics for health and things like that. I saw one comic, I think it was, and it was, oh, so you've taught a parrot how to speak a language. How soon can we fire everyone and have it start diagnosing health issues?
Yeah.
It's like the parrot doesn't understand what it's saying. It's just
Yep.
repeating
Right.
sentences that it's heard somewhere along the way. So, and that's
Yeah.
what the language models are. That's probability of putting the word advanced predictive text
That's
effectively.
right. It'll change. The promise is there. I think the upside of AI, I'm actually pretty bullish on it, but we've got to manage the downside risk at the same time. And I hope this isn't like other technology breakthroughs where we've plowed ahead with all the upside promise and not paid attention to the downside risk. I think we need to be doing both at the same time.
Yeah, in the same way as a risk professional, I've helped people. They want to get the benefits of artificial intelligence models using one of the vendors. And it's like, okay, well, I'll do the risk and governance analysis associated with the questions. It's not necessarily you're training your own model, but is it learning from what you give it? Is it being
Yeah,
shared with other people in other tendencies, et cetera, et cetera? And there's
that's
a
right.
lot of tough questions, and you start looking at the security complications of the current Microsoft recall
That's right.
feature that's supposed to be coming very soon. It's been thought of as a potential solution, but it's going to be a massive security issue, set
Yep.
cybersecurity protections back
Yep.
a long way.
So Microsoft has decided that they won't make it on by default. They'll make it off by default, and you can opt in. I'm sure people will opt in. I think one of the things I have seen is going back to that trustworthy question. One of the things that people feel they need to be able to do is to opt out if they don't want to participate. And we're seeing a lot of companies that are creating AI based services or AI solutions that aren't giving people the ability to opt out, or they're not giving people the ability to realize that they're interfacing with AI and not a human. And I think that's a mistake. They need to be very transparent about where they're using AI and where they're not. Now, at some point in the future, people aren't going to care. But for right now, because it's new, they care. So we need to be really specific about when we're using AI, when we're not, and can people opt out of using AI or having their data be used for AI language models. And right now it feels like that's been taken out of everybody's hands. So we'll see.
It almost sounds like it's potentially the death of cybersecurity, in that everyone's just going to throw all their data into AI and without a care as to
Maybe.
where it can go. And then there's recall that comes in along and just records it for posterity in other people's emails,
Yep.
for example, recorded on a database. And the question is potentially, has cybersecurity just reached its limit and everyone's going to throw their hands in the air and it's too hard?
There's more to cybersecurity than confidentiality. So I'm not worried about cybersecurity going forward. I think questions around how and when to appropriately share data is still going to go on, even with AI out there. Again, we'll see. I don't know. Too soon to tell.
Definitely too soon to tell. So AI can also be a powerful tool for improving security. Can you share any examples of how your organization is leveraging, or organizations that you've worked with, or other people in the industry, is leveraging AI to enhance its security posture, perhaps in areas like threat detection or automated incident response?
Right. So there's two main areas right now where I'm seeing AI being applied. One is definitely detection, response, and recovery. So we're starting to see solutions come about that do a better job of contextualizing the volumes and volumes of data that our SOC analysts and our incident responders have to deal with. There is also using AI for our red teamers. So again, getting better context around the environments that people are trying to penetrate, that kind of thing. So detection and response is definitely where we're seeing AI show up first. The other place I'm starting to see it is around contract management. So using AI solutions to go through contract language really quickly and be able to understand where we have contract obligations related to cybersecurity, where we've got notification obligations, and also to be able to identify where we've got contract terms that don't match our policy requirements. Because as you know, when you sign a contract with a vendor, the terms you agree to are the terms of the day. And everyone nods their heads and says, yes, we can agree to those terms. And sometimes those contracts can last 20 or 30 or 40 years. And your policies have certainly changed over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years. And so using AI to do that kind of data analysis on existing contracts and contract management, for that matter, is the other place where I'm starting to see AI show up. So going back to that really thorny problem of third-party risk management and third and fourth and fifth party mesh management, AI may have a role to play in that for us.
That's a good point. As the contract management makes a lot of sense. I hadn't really come across that. I'd been more in the detection and response and the technical side of logs and text. And so that's where I've seen the AI helping out. But the contract management makes a lot of sense in identifying what the terms are that could be impactful over older contracts. As AI continues to evolve, how do you see it impacting the field of cybersecurity in the long run?
I don't think this is a question completely unique to cybersecurity. I think there's a lot of questions right now around what's the impact of AI on the workforce? What will the workforce of the future look like? If I went back 4 or 5 months ago, I was pondering this question of, if we're going to use AI for things like detection and response, we're already seeing companies produce AI SOC analysts, right? So arguably what AI is going to do is come in and take the low-hanging fruit, I put those in air quotes, low-hanging fruit, junior security response roles that can be automated. So more of a machine learning automation kind of play than a generative play, but they're starting with that. And then of course they'll generate things like playbooks and reports and whatever they're going to do out of that. What they're essentially doing is taking the bottom couple of rungs off the career ladder. So they take the entry-level jobs away and we replace it with AI. Well, how does someone get to be a mid-level or a senior level person if there are no entry-level jobs for them to learn in to start with? So I was having a chat with people, and someone reminded me that when the graphics calculator came out, a lot of people went, "Oh my God, the graphics calculator is here. We are never going to have to teach anyone math ever again
Mhm.
because the calculator will do it for them." Right. And here we are, 40, 50, whatever, however long it's been, 60 years later, kids are still taking math in class and they're still learning the theory, but then they use the calculator to speed things up. But there is an
Mm.
expectation that they're going to learn the theory first so that they understand what it is the calculator's doing, right? And if they really want to geek out on it, then they can go and do a math PhD in university and all of the things, but not everyone's going to do that. That's fine. I think as we think about the workforce of the future, I think we're going to have to follow a similar sort of path. We are still going to need to teach people the basic entry level theory of what it is to be an entry level security engineer or a security analyst or what identity management engineer or whatever, knowing that on the job they're going to be using tools like AI and it's going to go super fast, but they've still got to learn the theory. So we're going to have to make sure that those things are in place. Now, the problem is we don't have those things in place very well today. It's not like we've got 200 years of cybersecurity curricula behind us and we've just got to sort of tweak it. So I still think we're going to have to play catch up on cybersecurity curricula in high school, community colleges or TAFEs, and then
Mm.
4-year or bachelor's programs and master's programs and so forth. But I think we can do it. And I think that's ultimately what's going to happen.
Yeah, I did a master's of IT security, and it was really dealt with at the master's level cybersecurity. It wasn't anything very much in the undergrad components. There was a subject, but wasn't as thorough as it needed to be. There's catch up definitely with what's going on, and then further, this is what I've been thinking about for some time, for many years, is cybersecurity needs an apprenticeship effectively
Yes.
as a
Yes.
trade in some of these, like pen testing needs a trade, a SOC analyst needs a trade,
That's right.
and then they need to do a 3-year apprenticeship on learning what they need, all the skills that they need before they
That's
can
right.
progress.
Yeah, I really agree. And I've given talks about this before too. I think there's a role for degrees and they're useful, but particularly at the moment, the way we do security is so tuned to how the company works that
Mm.
you can't just, even if you've got a theoretical understanding of what vulnerability management is, it's not until you're in the seat doing it for a certain company that you really know, oh, here at this company or this organization, this is what it means. And I've done vulnerability management in 3 different verticals, and it's different in each vertical
It
just
would be.
because of the nature of the vertical, right? So we need to treat it more like an apprenticeship model where you're doing hands-on skills-based training
And not just a
alongside a
6-month
journeyman.
boot camp, for example.
That's right.
It needs to be longer than that. And as you're
Absolutely.
describing, it needs the first couple of years of the SOC analysts or pen testing. I was interviewing another person recently, and they were discussing how they ran a master's level university course in pen testing, and they gave medium level challenge that a master's level should be able to do. And the person that tried it out with Pentest GPT, but
Mhm.
also doing it manually, was the one that
Yeah.
ended up winning the highest marks. The AI to help out those trades, that effectively a trade, in my opinion. It's almost like, especially in consulting, in pen testing, it's almost like you have Jedi's and Padawans.
That's
It's
right.
very much a expert skill as a professional that needs to be passed on to juniors, and it sort of congregates in smaller companies rather than the large companies, is from what
Yep.
I've seen. So many people might feel overwhelmed by security. What advice can you give our listeners on where to start or what resources to explore to learn more about protecting themselves online?
So if we're talking about people protecting themselves, I think there's a number of resources that are out there. I know the Australian government has some websites for how to keep safe online. The US
Mm.
does as well. I'd encourage people to start there. I think what you will find when you start there is that there are some common things that we recommend people do. One is use a password manager
Mhm.
so that you're not using the same password everywhere. To use a multi-factor authentication solution of some kind. So whether that's a Google Authenticator or a Microsoft or a Duo or whatever the situation is, have an application on your phone or on your laptop or desktop that allows you to have a second factor. So you have a password, but you also then have a second factor when you log in, the thing. Back up your systems and know how to back up your systems. I've got a lot of family members and others who are like, yes, I'm backing things up. And then when they really needed to do a restore, they realized they hadn't been backing things up or they didn't know how to do a restore. So back up your data, but also practice how to restore your data so you know how that works and that it's working properly. And making sure that the systems that you're using stay up to date in terms of patching. So if you can turn on automatic security updates for your laptop, desktop, phone, then do that and make sure that you do those things. Don't let them linger. If you're doing those basic things, I think you're generally going to be mostly safe. You can't ever think you're going to be completely safe, but a lot of when you hear people getting
it's raising the
impacted
bar.
online, it's making you less of a target. In the same way that you put a seatbelt on when you're in the car or you brush your teeth at night. This is just basic cyber hygiene. And if you're going to do cyber and everyone's doing cyber, this is sort of jacks for openers, basic stuff to do. So password managers, backups, multi-factor authentication. Again, you can go to those public websites and really understand it. If the question is, I really want to go deep on cybersecurity and I want to learn cybersecurity, how do I do that? This is actually where I think some of those certifications can come into play. Go look at some of the entry-level certifications like CompTIA Security Plus or something and see what kinds of topics they cover, and then go do some of those things. And you can go online. You can do LinkedIn Learning online on cybersecurity things, Coursera, coursework. There's online learning you can do. There's also community college, TAFE, and university courses that you can go take a look at as well. So if you really want to go deep, that's sort of where I'd start. And of course, look for local cybersecurity meetups if you're so inclined and you're extroverted. Just go out and show up at some of those places and find out what they're talking about.
Or even introverted. Some people will have learned to meet more people by going to meetups.
Yes. If you want to sort of do a Reddit thread, Reddit/cybersecurity, there's a lot of conversations going on there. Just know that, again, it's a public forum and be skeptical of the quality of the conversation, but there's some good conversation on there. So that can be another place to get started.
As you're a leader in the field, building and maintaining a strong security team is crucial. Can you share some insights into your approach to building and leading high-performing security teams?
As a leader, my job is to find people and get out of their way and let them do their job, right? So my job is to enable them doing their job, not to tell them how to do their job. First of all, as a leader, I've got to be clear about what the job is and what the scope of the job is. And again, that's going to depend on my budget. It's going to depend on what the company is looking for me to do and so forth. So having a strategy for my security organization that's clear on what the scope of the role that the organization is, the kinds of function we'll cover is a place to start. But then within that, making sure that, going back to that conversation about apprenticeships, I want to try and make sure that in any given function, I've got a couple of layers of experience there. I certainly like having entry-level people. They ask really smart questions and they question the status quo. And I want to have entry-level people, but I need to have mid and senior level people depending on the functional area as well. So to the extent I can make sure that I'm building teams with depth, not just width, I'm going to want to be able to do that. The other thing is making sure that the people that are on the team continue to get exposed to new thinking, new ideas, new training is really important. You can't just set and forget a security team. If you're not actively making them aware of the changes in the industry and the new thinking in the industry, you're falling behind. I want to make sure that I'm continuing to invest in any team that I've got.
That's some really good advice, especially if you can get the depth in the team as well. Everything from the entry levels, which seem to be scarce these days, they're starting to come up a bit, but they're hard to find. And there's a big gap going on between university/TAFE and the entry level role for cyber. Would you recommend someone starting out they've just finished university or TAFE, and they're looking to take their next step, but they can't get the first job because there's such a big gap and there's not many around? What advice do you have for them? Is it going and doing all these training websites like Hack the Box and Try Hack Me and
Yep.
not just offensive? Or is it just getting a CompTIA, or is it going and getting a job as a help desk for a year and getting
Yep.
some time on the resume?
The reality is we've got a lot of people coming out of schooling programs, universities, TAFEs, boot camps, and so forth. We've got an oversupply of quote unquote entry level cybersecurity talent at the moment. You're right. The dearth of talent is actually with people who've got like 5 to 10 years of experience. So if you're coming straight out of a schooling program of any kind, you have to understand that hiring managers are going to have a bias towards experience-based training. I wish they didn't. I don't think the bias needs to exist quite to the extent that it does, but the reality is right now they do. So anything that you can do that's going to give you hands-on experience is going to be great. Now that brings up a chicken and the egg problem, because you can't get the job without the experience. You can't get the experience without the job. So I think you're right. One is go look at another kind of IT role, help desk, web designer, network engineer, database administrator. Like, you pick it, mobile application developer, whatever. Go work in IT for a couple of years and then transition into security from there. I'm actually of the opinion there aren't that many quote unquote entry level cybersecurity jobs. If by entry level you mean I've never had a job before, it's really hard to get cybersecurity jobs if you've never had a job before, particularly if you've never had an IT job before. So your first step might be to get a generic IT job and then move over, or a generic compliance job or a generic legal job and then move over into a GRC role or a privacy role after that. I think you're right, though, Gordon. There are skills-based activities that you can do that simulate on-the-job learning that you need to put on your resume. So doing things like hack the box, participating in capture the flag activities, showing up at conferences and being part of hacker villages or tabletop exercises that go on at conferences can be another place where, okay, you're not getting paid to do it, but you're definitely doing the skills that an on-the-job person would use. Can be another place to think about. Getting a cyber certification can help. So if you don't have a cyber certification, that can be a thing. What I tell people if they've got a choice is find a college degree program or a TAFE program or a boot camp that also gets you a cybersecurity in industry certification as part of the program. Like, kill two birds with one stone. You've got to get your face out there. More often than not, particularly in the beginning, I see people get jobs because they've networked their way into a job. So if there are conferences in your city or town, volunteer to help out at those conferences so that you get to meet people. Show up and introduce yourself. Be a speaker at a conference. Even as somebody who's new to the industry, you've got things to say that people want to hear. So even if it's, this was my experience going through a boot camp, or this was my experience going through a degree program, can be the subject of a talk. And people want to hear new people talking because we all see the same talking heads on the conference circuit. You know, doing things like that, again, to improve your networking capabilities is the other thing. But if you already have a job at a company, the best place you can start is with the security team at that company. Go make them know who you are, introduce yourself to them, find out what's available. Even if there's not a job at the company, they probably know a job opening at another company. So they're a great place to start your networking with, is the security team at a company you already work at.
Some excellent advice. So I'm hoping some of the listeners will definitely latch onto that and get some good advice there. In terms of into the future of cybersecurity, looking ahead, what are your hopes for the future of cybersecurity, especially in terms of fostering a more secure and trustworthy digital environment?
I think for the longest time, business leaders have thought of cybersecurity as a sub-IT function. Like, there's all this IT, you know, there's the help desk and there's the network team and there's the application team and there's the this and the that, and then there's the security team. And what they fail to realize is that security is a horizontal that impacts every piece of their business, and it is not a sub-IT function. So my hope for the future is that the industry matures and elevates, not that it takes over the world, but that it's recognized as its own discrete function. It's its own job family. It's not a sub family of the IT job family. It deserves its own budget. It's not a piece of the CIO's budget or the CTO's budget. It is its own thing, like finance or HR or marketing or sales. Like, I would love to see that kind of elevation of the
Mm.
understanding of technology risk. I think every company, every organization is a technology organization that happens to use technology for some other end, for retail, for education, for finance, whatever. But at its heart, it's a technology company. And cybersecurity is about technology risk. So cyber should be understood that way and treated that way so that we can do a better job collectively of managing the cyber risk profile of an organization. That's internal. I think my hope as at an industry level is that we start collaborating on issues. I think we do a really good job of admiring problems
Mhm.
and talking to one another about how difficult things are. And if we're going to solve some of these problems, we've got to collectively solve some of these problems. And I'm starting to see it happen in certain areas, but I want to see policy from governments that foster collaboration to solve problems, not just foster compliance. And we're not quite there yet. So that's what I'm hoping for the future.
It's a very positive vision for the future with regards to hopefully getting everyone to work together in a nice way, recognize, would you put cybersecurity under risk or is it a mix of both IT and risk and people, and it should be out on its own as its own division? Should it be another faculty, a separate faculty of a university, a cybersecurity faculty as beside an IT faculty?
Yeah, I think so. Within a university setting, I think cybersecurity should be its own college. However, your university
Yeah.
describes that, right? Yes, it's multidisciplinary. So this is the thing that makes cybersecurity really weird. It's not just an arts and sciences kind of problem. It's not just a business problem. It's not just a legal problem. It's not just a medical problem. It's a piece of all of it. So it needs to be in a part of the university that touches all parts of the university academically, from a research
Mm.
perspective, as well as from an administrative perspective. So yes, it should be separate from IT. The question of whether it is a subset of other risk is an interesting one. I've seen people running security programs in some publicly traded organizations where the CISO reports to the head of operational risk,
Mm.
who then reports to the CEO, because technology risk is another
Mm.
operational risk, like safety or whatever,
Mm.
lab safety or occupational health and safety or whatever. But through that lens, HR is a risk, right? HR is about managing human risk. So
Yep.
in that case, would you put HR underneath your chief operational risk officer? People wouldn't, right? They put
Probably
people
wouldn't.
at the
Yeah.
top of the house, right? I might argue that rather than having the CISO report to the CIO who reports to the CEO, maybe the CIO should report to the CISO. Just a thought.
Very, very challenging ideals there.
Some
It
people
should
have
be.
done it.
Oh,
Some organizations have done it. It's not that radical anymore. It's radical in some places for sure.
in some places.
Mm.
Oh, very good. Very good. So I'll just move on to the last couple of questions that are a bit lighter. What are 3 cybersecurity books that you would recommend? You wrote a
I
book, didn't you?
I've
Oh.
written a book about getting into cybersecurity called Navigating the Cybersecurity Career Path. So if you're trying to get into cybersecurity, I'd recommend that book. I'm sure you're shocked and amazed. Actually, I'm part of a committee called the Cybersecurity Canon. So if you Google it, cybersecuritycanon.com, it will take you to a website where people who are in the security industry have read lots of security books and written reviews of those books. And if the book's really, really good, we nominate it to go into the Cybersecurity Canon Hall of Fame. And so there are some books there. So 3 of those books. The first one is Cuckoo's Egg. Cuckoo's Egg was the first book to be inducted into the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame. It was written by a guy named Cliff Stoll, and it was the first ever documented cybersecurity incident / breach. So Cuckoo's Egg, I recommend everybody read that. Most recently, we inducted 2 books into the cybersecurity canon. One is called Cybersecurity Myths and Misconceptions is the name of the book. It's fabulous. So it talks about all the things that we've talked about as a security industry for the last 20, 30 years, and why they're myths and why they're maybe misunderstood and why we talk about them but in the wrong way. And the whole book, it's very detailed in terms of why did we say this in the beginning and why is it not valid now, or why was it never valid? And so it's a really great way of understanding the whole cybersecurity industry. So that's the second one, cybersecurity myths and misconceptions. And then the last one is called Traces in the Dark. And Traces in the Dark is a book that was written by an investigative journalist whose name is...
Oh, is that Andy Greenberg?
Yes, thank you. Traces in the Dark talks about government agents who were reverse engineering blockchain so that they could identify criminal activity on the dark web.
Yes.
It also goes into using the same kinds of technologies to identify people who were doing child and human trafficking rings as well. International in scope, super fascinating in terms of the way different government agencies and private sector organizations work together. Fascinating read, and I'd recommend that as well.
Oh, wow. There's some very good books there. Cybersecuritycanon.com.
You got it.
Or is it .org? Sorry?
.com.
.com. Cybersecuritycanon.com.
And that's canon with one N. C-A-N-O-N. Canon.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. As a description of a storage of knowledge and books.
You got it.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Funny you ask that. So I live now in Columbus, Ohio. I've been here for about 30 years, but I grew up in Australia. So I like both places. I'd like to stay in both places. If I could work out how to be an extreme snowbird between North America and Australia, that's probably what I do.
And where can listeners find you online?
I have a website. It's csohelen.com. You can find all of my contact information there, but most often you find me on LinkedIn. So you can Google me on LinkedIn, and I post, and still on X and a little bit on Mastodon. But I use the social media to ask questions of people that I want to get a broad industry response for. So you can follow me along and think about the questions
I've
that I ask.
seen you post questions, and it seems you get different responses based on different social media settings.
Absolutely, I do. And I find it fascinating. So I will keep doing it because I get a more varied response if I post in multiple places. So it's good.
Very, very, very cool. Polling the community. Well, Thank you very much for your time today. It's very, very kind of you to share your knowledge and wisdom with our listeners. If the audience wants to find you, they can find you on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'll chat again soon.
Thanks so much, Gordon.
That concludes part 2 of our insightful conversation with the remarkable Helen Patton here on the Cyber Consulting Room podcast. Throughout this special 2-part episode, we've been fortunate to glean valuable insights from Helen's unique perspective on building a people-centric approach to cybersecurity. We explored how to foster a security culture within organizations, leveraging industry connections for success, and influence public policy for positive change. We were also captivated by Helen's thoughts on building trust in an increasingly technological world. A heartfelt thank you once again to Helen Patton for sharing her wisdom and expertise with our listeners. These conversations are a testament to the power of collaboration within the cybersecurity community. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Cyber Consulting Room podcast wherever you get your podcasts. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss an episode packed with valuable insights from leading cybersecurity experts like Helen Patton. Until next time, stay safe and remember, empowered people are the key for a more secure digital future.